Okay, so Ryan Cowden, who was previously in that role for the Titans, now moves into an assistant general manager role. Well, no, that's not really true. Cowden was VP of personnel. I don't think he ever officially had the title assistant general manager.
Maybe semantics, right? Because he was right there, on the right at the right side of John Robinson.
Sure.
I mean, he and Monty Ossenfort, is it fair to say they were essentially what amounts to assistant general managers?
I think that there has to be some kind of hierarchy that we're not really discerning between. You know what I'm saying? Because, his first name's Adam. I'm forgetting his last name. The guy for the 49ers that everybody wanted for their GM.
Adam Peters.
Adam Peters. So Adam Peters is an actual assistant general manager, and he was the most well-thought-of general manager candidate going around. He ultimately ended up declining interviews to stay with the 49ers through their run, and he's a local product. He's a 49ers fan. Like, that seems like it might be a dream job for him. So it's a structure that is now like the 49ers with a GM and an assistant GM. Now, will they have a vice president of player personnel like Rand Carthon was in San Francisco? Yes. Will they have, I think Monty Ossenfort was in charge of, was Monty in charge of player personnel? I would have to go back and look at, I don't want to get everything mixed up. Either way, they now have a structure that seems to be in keeping with what San Francisco has done and what Cleveland has done, which is an example that, you can cite rightly or wrongly for Cleveland's roster decisions as of late.
Speaking of structure, I have something I want to throw at you.
Please.
So
actually throw at me? You've already...
Not literally.
I thought you were going to throw an actual bottle at my head.
So Mike Vrabel did not interview, but requested to interview Tim Kelly, correct? When he was the offensive coordinator of the Houston Texans.
Yes, and was declined.
He was declined. So he tried to bring Kelly on, or tried to approach bringing Tim Kelly on in one way or another. Ultimately, after Kelly and the Texan staff are fired when they hired David Culley, he does bring Tim Kelly on as passing game coordinator. Todd Downing is fired. Tim Kelly elevated to offensive coordinator. Mike Vrabel did interview Charles London, the former quarterbacks coach of the Atlanta Falcons. That has been documented, and he doesn't hire London to be the offensive coordinator, but he brings him on to be the passing game coordinator and the quarterbacks coach, moving Pat O'Hara to an analyst role. Does this to you indicate some sort of potential plan for the future, succession plan, with obviously Mike Vrabel's willingness to keep things in-house when it comes to his coaching hires?
It would seem to set up well that way if you think that Tim Kelly is going to do so well that he becomes the next head coach to be hired away from your staff.
Yeah, it could go one of three ways, right? Tim Kelly is the Titans offensive coordinator for years to come, or Tim Kelly is so good that he's hired away, or he doesn't work out and he gets fired.
So let me take this a level further, okay? Because not only is that of note, but the other shifting of people already in place on the staff around kind of indicates to me, and Mike Vrabel said as much, the interest in trying to put people in more advantageous positions on his staff. So Jason Houtaling, forgive me if I'm mispronouncing that, the offensive line coach, he was already on the staff. He was promoted to now the head offensive line coach, for lack of a better term. Luke Steckel, formerly tight ends, moved to run game analyst, not run game coordinator, but analyst. Remember that he was interviewing for offensive coordinator jobs this last cycle, at least one. Pat O'Hara, pass game analyst, not pass game coordinator, like Lucas just mentioned Charles London
And
is.
previously he was quarterbacks coach.
Correct.
So London takes that role from him.
And Tony Dews as tight ends coach, formerly running backs coach. So let's take this piece by piece, because those titles may sound irrelevant to you unless you're familiar with, one, the hiring process in the NFL, and two, how it kind of seems to systematically revolve around tight ends coach for one reason or another.
So Art and Downing were both tight ends coaches.
Malarkey was a tight ends coach. Like, this is something that it's involved in the run blocking, it's involved in the pass game. Like, it is one of the most integral parts before you advance to either pass game analyst or pass game coordinator, ultimately offensive coordinator. There's just been in years now added additional steps. I believe that those moves were to put those particular people in more advantageous positions to impact the offense as opposed to coaching position groups. That is something that people had questions about with, for example, Jim Schwartz being hired away by the Cleveland Browns. These analyst roles, in addition with pass game coordinator, run game coordinator, defensive pass game coordinator, these roles, and you'll hear from Mike Vrabel on this, are putting his coaching staff in better positions to succeed in their careers.
Well, just continuing to try to, want these guys to be a part of our offense, and not having a position group per se is going to allow them to, do some of that pre-advanced work, but also help and assist throughout our offense. And those guys have been here since I got here, and so I want them to be able to help us in a multiple ways, and confident that they'll be able to do that.
So are you taking Mike Vrabel's word on that's a move to allow these guys to affect the offense in different ways and not limit them to one position, or do you view it as a demotion? Because I think surface level, somebody looks at, he was quarterbacks coach, now he's an analyst. I think a lot of people would look at that and say that's a downgrade in position.
Not if Pat wants to call plays. I think that's a better position for him rather than working through quarterback mechanics specifically. Now he's involved with scheme. I think that's a promotion from just quarterbacks coach. Now you have Charles London, who is the pass game coordinator and quarterbacks coach. So he'll have something to do during practice, and then when they go in and collaborate in team drills like that, he's going to be influencing things on first and second down perhaps. And by the way, Mike Vrabel was asked about that yesterday as well, the idea of Charles London. Will he now assume the role that Tim Kelly was involved with?
I mean, it's going to, he won't be able to probably do as much going forward, Joe, with the responsibility of the quarterbacks. I see him, bringing the ideas that he had, and when we met, and communicating and helping us put together the best plan in the spring, and then ultimately helping Tim as we go through training camp, and then into the season. So there's one person has to make sure that they're leading the offense, and that'll be Tim, but making sure that everybody's voice is heard, and then we go in with a game plan, and then we have to execute it, and we have to make sure that we're calling a sound football game.
615-737-1045 is how you react to what you just heard from Mike Vrabel. Let's talk about what Tim Kelly's role was in 2022, more specifically, to flesh that out. We'll do that here in just a second.
Last thing on this. Charles London essentially is just one step below being an offensive coordinator, right?
Yes.
He's the passing game coordinator. He's the quarterback's coach.
Correct.
Now look to the flip side as we talk about potentially planning ahead or having pieces in place that can just fall into place when there are more shifts within the coaching staff. Chris Harris, interviewed by multiple teams to be a defensive coordinator, as a defensive coordinator candidate, including the 49ers, who ultimately go with Steve Wilks. Chris Harris in there, not as just the cornerbacks coach, but the defensive passing game coordinator.
Mm-hmm.
So this feels strategic to me by Mike Vrabel.
They are finding new ways to incorporate new staff members in new roles to make sure, one, that they have basically a stock that they can pull from, or not if they choose to, because Shane Bowen is going to continue to get discussed as long as the Titans defense is one of the teams that people look at and say, okay, what are the Titans doing on this particular week? What are they doing defensively? Because a lot of times it's regarded as different or more effective or more strategic than a lot of other teams. Shane Bowen is well thought of. I fully expect him, as long as they don't have, a cratering season, to be a part of the conversation around coaching searches next offseason. So to get Chris Harris on staff now, maybe he interviews for more defensive coordinator jobs next offseason anyway. But if you have to replace yours, you've got your Tim Kelly in-house.